Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the World of Allergy, a podcast produced by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. I'm your host, Dave Stukas. I'm a board-certified allergist and immunologist and serve as a social media medical editor for the Academy. Our podcast series will use different formats to interview thought leaders from the world of allergy and immunology. This podcast is not intended to provide any individual medical advice to our listeners. We do hope that our conversations provide evidence-based information. Any questions pertaining to one's own health should always be discussed with their personal physician. The Find an Allergist search engine on the Academy website is a useful tool to locate a listing of board-certified allergists in your area. Finally, use of this audio program is subject to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at www.AAAAI.org. Today's edition of our Conversations from the World of Allergy podcast series will discuss the new journal being launched by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology called the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology Global. We are pleased to welcome Dr. David Peden as our guest for today's episode. Dr. Peden is the Senior Associate Dean for Translational Research and the Medical Director of the Center for Environmental Medicine, Asthma, and Lung Biology at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. Dr. Peden is a past president of the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology and has led a long and distinguished career as a clinician scientist focused on investigating the impact of environmental agents and pollutants on respiratory and systemic inflammation and physiology. He's also the new editor-in-chief of the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology Global, which we'll discuss today. Dr. Peden, thanks so much for taking the time to join us and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here.
I think this is going to be a wonderful way for our listeners to learn about this new journal, and for myself as well. It's very exciting. But before we discuss some of those details, I'd like to learn more about your own path towards a career as a clinician scientist. When did you first become interested in research?
So, ironically enough, my research exposure began when I played softball in the summer of my junior year. I was at West Virginia University, and a friend of mine was a technician in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology. And it was before I got into medical school. I said, sure. I was doing summer school at that time, so I got on the team. There, I met a guy who was a diehard Chicago Cubs fan. His name is Knox Van Dyke, and he had a lab. And when I was in my senior year, I wanted an honors biology project. I never thought I would be a researcher. I was quite convinced I was going to be a primary care provider. But he let me play in his lab and like answer questions. And actually, my research area was rudimentary neutrophil biology, and I looked at oxidative burst in effective drugs on it, and ultimately the differences in oxidative burst in infants versus adults. And so that's how I got into research. And because I'd been able to be in a lab and write a couple of papers, when it came time for me to finish my pediatrics residency, I applied literally on a lark because I saw a brochure to the NIH where. And much to my surprise, I got hired there. So that's how my answer. It was wonderful serendipity coupled with a wow, who would have hired me for this?
That's really interesting. Can you recall anything about that first summer in the lab that really, stoked your passion and wanted you to learn more about research?
Well, the process of devising experiments. First of all, I was given enough leeway to do some stuff, but enough coaching so I wouldn't do it entirely wrong. And I think and there was as much discussion about the hypotheses and why we would do this, and Knox was really interested in clinical application, and it was not just, I shouldn't say not just, I mean, frankly, much of the essence we have now are all on the backs of hardcore basic science. We'd have no mRNA vaccines if we didn't have cell biologists that had spent 15 years studying this. But from my perspective, we were able to do that. And when I was a resident, actually, is when I took my master's degree with Knox while I was in medical school, and then I stayed at West Virginia for my residency. And while there, that was where I could do get access to neonatal neutrophils, and I wrote a modest paper in the journal Pediatrics at the time, but that was but it was the iterative interaction, and it was his lab looked like a mad scientist lab. I mean, it was, but it was, but for me, it was a great place to gain some confidence in how to, form a hypothesis, answer questions, and have fun while doing it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you mentioned serendipity about just some of the individuals that you met early on in your career. But have you taken note of any pivotal moments throughout your career that maybe have steered you in a certain direction that you didn't really see yourself going in, aside from your initial foray into research, of course?
Well, a couple. But first of all, Knox was a big point of that. I had once I dabbled in the laboratory. My department chair, Bill Neal, who just sadly recently passed away, when I was a resident, he recognized the value of a physician scientist. And when I sheepishly asked for some time, a month or two off on a research elective, he more than enthusiastically buffered my time to allow me to get some time to finish this paper on neonatal neutrophil function. And I had in West Virginia at the time I was there. We didn't have a ton of fellows, which meant that senior residents did a fair amount of the things that I think in many institutions now fellows do. So I had exposure to that. I had some very good hemonc attendings. I had a wonderful ID attending, and my general career path was going to be something allergy immunology. And then I met a guy named Eric Brestol, who was a physician scientist and actually left West Virginia to go to ECU, but he also cemented my interest in research. When I went to the NIH, one thing that struck me that I think is really important, in my opinion. So I guess it's my opinion. I'm allowed to say whatever I want, but I think that to be a successful physician scientist, it is built on the basis of being a strong physician, to understand where we are in medicine now, so that when you approach your research question, it is from the context of trying to find some relevance to it. And actually, when I went to NIH, and I believe me, I was a pediatrician from West Virginia in the middle of the NIH, and what I found was that the clinical skills I had at West Virginia, coupled with the research experience I got, really helped me, because that
Mhm.
first year, all of us at the NIH were basically interns again on this very unusual service that included, Mike Frank's complement patients, and
Mm.
Warren Strober's GI patients, and John Gallen and Harry Malik's CGD patients, which we had, that was a year we were testing gamma interferon. So we had an atypically high number of children. In my group of fellows, there were 10 of us, two were pediatricians. So we were popular for phlebotomy skills. Um, uh, and Anthony Fauci's vasculitis, and at the time HIV patients.
Mhm.
So uh, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know, and it's a tremendous amount I learned. Mike Callender was my research mentor, and so when I got into the lab, all those people were tremendous impact. I mean, Mike was great to me and gave me a spot, and Mike Frank, probably had more job interviews with Mike Frank than I've had with anyone else in my life.
Mhm. Well, I love you sharing your background, and it sounds like you have just a wonderful family tree of folks that you were around early on in your career. And I know that you serve as a wonderful mentor for many now as they're starting their careers. So, along those lines, do you have any practical advice for medical trainees or junior faculty that are looking to follow a similar career path as yours?
Well, frankly, the way medical school admissions are now, it is useful if you want to be a physician scientist, to get some science background. Some of that can be formal. Some of that can be as an undergraduate, getting into some degree of a research experience, and I think that for many admissions committees, the folks are beginning to look for that. Uh, I do think that medical school is fairly prescribed, but in the summers and in your undergraduate experience, looking for some mentored research experience, whether it's in the form of a class that you can take. Some universities do this for coursework, some study experience. Uh, the center I work in, I mean, and I'm now kind of I'm the medical director The day-to-day lab stuff is run by the director of our center is a PhD immunotoxicologist named Alona Jaspers, and one of my longtime colleagues, Neil Alexis, runs our biorepository, and it's in those labs that a lot of people get their in our center get their lab
Mm,
leg, and they're both really good at doing for me what doing for them what Knox Van Dyke did for me,
mm,
giving them enough, giving them some chance uh, to play in a lab and get some lab legs, but with enough structure that they're actually making some forward progress. I actually I should also mention Heather Wells, who works with Neil, who's the lab manager, who probably really does make sure that their work that their effort equals work and not just smoke.
mm. This is a common theme that I hear from so many of our guests of just the value of mentorship. And for all of us, it's working with those who can open doors for us and sort of help us build those skills that we need to grow our own careers. Well, let's move on to the new journal, Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology Global. Why on earth did the Academy decide to start a third journal? Give us some background here.
So and this happened while I was on the board, and there was discussions while I was president, and when I was initially on the board, my first term, that's when In Practice came about. Uh,
Mm,
and I think the reason for for going beyond JACI is that there are areas of investigation and areas of research that are germane to our specialty and important to many of our practitioners and scientists within our specialty that just simply don't have the voice that we might want them to have. So, for instance, Jackie, under both Donald Leung's leadership and continued with Zuhair Ballas, are is the number one cited journal for allergy in the world, and regularly is the number one rated impact factor allergy journal in the world, and it's there because they take the pick of the litter, or they take
mm,
they and what that means and what it meant when I was an associate editor there was that you were really looking for articles that are going to be clinically or paradigm shifting. It's either a phase 3 clinical trial. If it's a phase 2 study, it's going to be a real important proof of concept that's never been done before. If it's an environmental study, it's going to be something that can either, that if published, could end up changing a regulation, or it's a large epidemiology study. I won't speak for Zuhair or the various things he takes, but there's a focus towards biggish studies that are going to move the area forward. In practice, is true to its name, uh, they have taken Michael and Bob Zeiger, Michael Schatz and Bob Zeiger have and his team have taken that journal. They've taken top rate articles, but the ones that are more in the mode of implementation or practice, if Jackie's the translational journal, this is the new drug and we just found that it's going to work, and there's you know, in practice, I think is like well, here's how you actually could use it. Here, what
mm,
the studies show, you should implement it. Which biologics for whom, and does immunotherapy for X work for disease Y?
mm,
And I've looked to both of the journals in thinking about what global does. But so why global? What I found while I was an associate editor uh, is that, and Jackie, is that there were a lot of good things. They were just not ready for prime time. They were developmental, or they were early stage studies, or they were small sample size. They were intriguing but not definitive, and a lot of basic science gets passed over. I mean, the truth of the
mm,
matter is, a lot of cell culture work or animal model work or some really important stuff, unless it's really paradigm shifting and a truly novel concept. And frankly, many of those articles go to more regular basic science journals, don't have much voice in the academy, or not as much as we all felt they deserve, including Zuhair and Michael. I mean, all of us felt that there was a niche, but in order for allergy to be competitive in grant funding, Jackie frankly needs to remain a top tier high impact journal. But we need a home, and we need a place for for these earlier studies or these modest sample size but very intriguing, the kinds of studies that point to that provide the rationale for the bigger studies that
Mhm.
ultimately may get into the other journals. And so that was our motivation. The other motivation was we really so JACI Global is kind of a has two meanings. One is global, as we want to reach out and be more embracing of international authors, and
Mhm.
the resources in various places vary from region to region. So oftentimes very informative case reports in very unique populations, if they're small and not immediately applicable to European North America, they may not get the voice in JACI, but we hope that we would provide that voice in global. Global also means a more global expanse of the practice of science. So more basic science, phase one, phase two proof of concept studies, uh, case reports that might actually lead. In fact, I'm envisioning that very interesting case reports. We might invite those authors to not just go to the case report, but then do either a narrative or a structured review around base, inspired by their case, but then provide an article that would also inform what do we know about non-IgE mediated drug reactions. I mean, I'm making up a case, but that's
Mhm.
so. Uh, put another way, we're kind of going to be the plus one for allergy. And our sister agencies have Yaki. There are other journals that are kind of in that mode as well. But that's the mindset that we have. And I'm anticipating a roughly you know 40 to 50% acceptance rate. We're not going to just accept everything. There has to
Mhm.
be a hypothesis or an informative case. It needs to be not so spurious that it really it's so unique you don't know what to make out of it. But it does not need to be a giant sample size definitive clinical trial either. So
Mhm.
during this first year, we will find our pattern. After a year or two, I suspect early on we're going to pass on papers we're going to wish we did. We're going to accept some papers that we in retrospect might have needed a little bit more refinement, but that's the goal, is to provide a voice for a lot of investigators that I think have not felt that their work could be published in academy journals, although they oftentimes present their abstracts at our academy meeting.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's really interesting that perspective you offer of how you, as the editor in chief and as a new journal, you sort of have to find your way as well. And I imagine a lot of that just relies upon the types of submissions that you receive and what gets published and things like that. But another key difference that I noticed was that Jackie Global is going to be open access. And so, why is it important to have open access journals, and what type of commitment does that require from the academy in order to provide that?
Well, open access. I mean, a subscription-based journal, has a different business model. People subscribe to it. Now, both Jackie and Jackie in Practice ultimately are open access, to people that are NIH or have funding agencies
Mhm.
that require it. But there's usually a year or so embargo where the early access, you either download the article for a fee or you're a long-term subscriber. That's a standard traditional business model for journals, and one that most top tier journals maintain. When I say top tier, let me rephrase that. The more competitive, exclusive journals, maintain. The open access, though, first of all, gold open access, which is truly open access, means that anybody with internet access, once the article is accepted, should be able to download it and use that information. Uh, uh, the NIH hasn't quite gotten to the point where they're demanding gold open access, but PubMed Central is essentially our nation's way to ensure that anything that's federally funded has to ultimately within a year be from initial acceptance be deposited on the PubMed Central, so that a version of that article is available to anybody with internet access. But European funders and Research for Life Consortium, which is a consortium that includes, investigators and clinicians that are in, less well-resourced areas of the world than ours. There's a move towards making research more transparent, making research more available. So the business model for that is that when people submit their fees, there's an article processing fee that that's how you make the journal viable. Clearly, the Academy has put some budget into this as well to help support that while we're getting there. And I mean, that's true for actually all the journals to a certain extent. Although JACI does great, from a business perspective. But that will be an ongoing thing we take advantage of. We collectively think long term this global will be. I mean, if we look at this purely from a business sense, the Academy now has a family of journals, and there's a regular quarterly meeting that traditionally had involved Zuhair and Michael, and now includes me. So we try to be fairly consistent about and agree on many key issues. Including, there's a recent New England Journal publication that speaks to, needing to specify how inclusive your research populations were, and therefore how relevant those results are to all populations. We're meeting to figure out exactly what our journal stance will be, but unless there's some major reason for divergence, we're striving to have some of these key core concepts to be consistent across the journals. JACI Global, I think, are from a business goal. We want to be enough of a home so that when people submit, when they submit, they know they'll get a voice, and ultimately, hopefully, as their studies become more mature or more definitive, or lead to more definitive studies, those will then be JACI submissions. I think that so we really want to better embrace our investigators, including junior investigators, including investigators from regions that have not been as that we've not accommodated for all kinds of understandable reasons with our bigger journals.
Hmm. So, just to clarify, do authors who submit to JACI Global need to pay a fee to have their work published in the journal?
So generally, yes. They don't need to publish a fee to have their work reviewed. So
Okay.
so we will, so you submit the article as reviewed, uh, but no going, so in most labs in the U.S. that have developed, our initial for a full article original submission will be about $2,000, which is in the same range as many other open, maybe even better than some open access journals. For a small report, a case report, or a brief report, be $800. However, a big however for the Research for Life countries and Elsevier, which is the publishing house that the academies work with for all the journals. If you for authors that are in regions that do not have the same research infrastructure as North America or Europe have, or Australia, there are modified fees or fee waivers, and and actually in our contract with Elsevier, I've forgotten how many, frankly, but there is a certain number of overt fee waivers that we can provide. Again, not for countries that have reasonably well-funded research infrastructure, but for those places that do not. We do not want to, because of money, exclude those voices as well.
Hmm. You offered some background as to the types of submissions you're looking to receive for JACI Global, and you'd like to be a home for a lot of folks who may not find their work necessarily suitable for JACI or other journals. But what types of manuscripts are you looking to publish? Is it going to be sort of the same allotment as we see in the other journals through the Academy, or are you going to have any different types of formats to offer?
Well, we will accept case reports that are not a format that JACI will have. We're not going to accept every case report. There's an informative case report or series of patients, and then there's the case report that you write really quickly so you can have a reason to come to the meeting. Those are perhaps less likely to be published without, unless it's a super weird case or a compelling case, or the discovery of a new mutation that leads on to something else. But we will have structured reviews as well as narrative reviews. In terms of the genre of art, so our article types are going to look more or less the same. What I'm hoping we'll see more of are basic science, either in vitro studies or animal studies that don't regularly that are not suitable because the JACI's translational and human translational and in practice is is clinical. So we will. I mean, maybe another comparison to journals many people know is we might be kind of the red journal for our
Hmm.
academy, much as the so-called red journal has that role in the for the American Thoracic Society. Many of our members are familiar with that, so that's another comparator. So the other thing, though, is that once an article is accepted, and this is true, we will have quarterly issues, but because we're online, you don't have to wait for the issue to come out, and it'll come out digitally. But before once an article has a DOI designation, it'll be posted and it'll be citable, and it can be considered a published, an accepted published article. So we're hopeful that between a different quality bar, for JACI Global, you have to be solid, but not necessarily exclusive. For JACI, you
Hmm.
need to be exclusive, and in practice, you need to be, for lack of a better phrase, immediately useful to the practicing population. Ours is. But so there are clearly standards, but they're not as exclusive. This is for good early work that we're hopeful will lead somewhere.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned the quarterly publication schedule, but also once manuscripts are accepted for publication, that they'll be available. So, what's that going to look like? Will it be sort of continually updated on a consistent basis, or once a quarter you're going to push certain theme issues or things like that? Give us a sense of what you're thinking.
So for any one given article, they will be available as soon as they're published. We will organize. We will organize. Our issues as they are. We've actually I'm not firmly decided about theme issues or not. There may be a couple of key themes that are World Asthma Day. We may make we may contribute to that. Uh, you know I think I think in the spirit of remaining open and available, we may have some themes we want to, or some areas we want to enrich, and we may try to solicit articles in a certain area. What early stage drug allergy or studies, or basic investigations of immune deficiency or those sorts of things. Uh, but I don't think we're going to be quite as we're going to need quite so much to have theme issues uh, as JACI or In Practice does. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, is the value of JACI and for In Practice for those authors that get in is they are higher impact journals. I mean, I certainly want to be as high an impact journal as we want, but not not our our part in this team is not to be is not to be JACI. We're not going to be another JACI. We are going to be maybe, I don't know, early JACI, but the but the so we like I said, we will look for certain theme areas uh, intermittently, but our focus is going to be on service to authors. So we want articles, once they're accepted, we want them to be posted fairly quickly. The other thing that we anticipate doing as our team gels and as we become more established is to offer, and frankly, the other journals do this as well. I'm more, and as I said when I interviewed for this position, I'm more interested in the H factor than the impact factor. For those who aren't familiar, the H factor is an individual author's citations, and there are many tricks, as it were, or maneuvers one can do. Because once your article is published in a journal that is indexed in, say, PubMed, you know, the right search terms will find that article, whether it's in JACI or whether it's in New England Journal or whether it's in or whether it's in JACI Global. And I think there are some tricks to how you title an article that make it more easily found. Uh, so for instance, the effect of studies of the effect of corticosteroids on hives is not the same as high dose corticosteroids cure hives.
Mm.
And uh, probably not the best example I could have thought of right now, because I mean, if anyone can really cure hives besides nature, you let me know. But but the but that said, I think there are little nuances in how one titles an articles. Oftentimes, and when JACI was still in a position to accept letters to the editor, which they're not now because of impact factor rules, I used to coach people to say, your conclusion should be your title.
Mm, I think
You
it's good advice.
uh, and the immediate take home point should be there, and then your article should prove that point.
Hmm.
Uh, so we're interested in figuring out ways that we can promote articles. Not everyone's going to have a highly cited article. Many people publish very important work, but in a very focused audience. I would argue that there's a lot of occupational work that doesn't have the broad catchment that a new biologic for asthma will have. But for those people, for that relatively, for those people that have an occupational illness that see the smaller cadre of us that focus a lot on occupational disease, those articles have significant impact for them. That's an important area, as an example, that I think we, could be better serviced with global.
Sure. It's funny you reminded me of an editorial I was privileged to publish about a decade ago, and I believe the title was along the lines childhood asthma and obesity, the chicken or the egg, or something like that.
Yeah.
And to this day, twice a week, I still get solicitations from veterinary journals asking me to publish my work with them because they catch up on the chicken and the egg in the title. So it triggers their algorithm. So yeah, it's hilarious. But no, I think that was a great point that you mentioned there. Well, where are you going to get your reviewers from? Is this going to be for people who review for Jackie or Jackie in practice? Are they going to automatically be put in the pool, or are there other ways that people can get involved?
So, so initially, yes, we will. We have access to. We've been our editor colleagues have graciously granted us access to their reviewer pools, and we are inviting reviewers even now. So we launched in September 1, and we've received both transfer articles from other journals, or from our other journals, as well as some de novo submissions. And right now we're using principally the JACI database. There's a lot of overlap between JACI and in practice anyway, uh, uh, but and the in practice team has allowed us to do that as well. Ultimately, as the other journals have, we will get, people can email us, and of course that will inspire you to ask me who to email to, and I don't remember that.
We'll put links in the show notes and everything like that, so you don't have to. Yeah.
But the uh, uh, and and oftentimes, if a new author comes in, after we've seen their work, we might invite them to be a reviewer, and we'll follow the same word of mouth and or other avenues that other folks have had. And to be quite honest, if people do not want to be eventually do not want to be on our database, because they're just, swamped with opportunities to review. How's that for a euphemism? Uh, we can, we can tailor that as well. But our initial reviewer pool, we are building from the ones that our academy is currently built.
Okay. And most of the time, if I recall, about 14 days turnaround time is requested of reviewers for Jackie and Jackie in practice. Are you anticipating the same request of your reviewers for Jackie Global as well?
Yes, we will make that same request. Given the demands that people have on their time to ask for it, unless there's a hot article,
Hmm.
which frankly, an article that hot may not, will, unless it's, well, there's two definitions of hot. One is the information is so new and so immediate that we need to get it in. The other article is hot is I have a grant submission coming and I need to show productivity. So
Hmm.
as and my grant's going in 5 weeks. Uh, but unless an article is hot, as it were, I anticipate that realistically, life has a funny way of getting into best intended volunteer work, and
Hmm.
we will politely pester reviewers, and we'll try to get people to move more quickly. Uh, Again, I think some of our clinical articles do not need to be as complete as they have been for other journals. That's I'm not inviting people to just throw stuff at us, but
Hmm.
so hopefully we will not have a ton of second or third reviews. I mean, for JACI, occasionally, it really, there, a small number of papers really do go to almost everyone gets an initial opportunity to revise their manuscript.
Hmm.
But opportunity may not be the way that the authors think about it. But
Hmm.
uh, and occasionally they get a second opportunity as well. And I'm hopeful that that will not be as much the case. The only one thing we'll have to be mindful of is that when authors are not fluent in English, just as I'm not fluent in most other languages. Uh, those who know me say just about any other language. Some who really know me wonder if I'm fluent in English. But be that as it may, uh, the there will be occasional language issues that come up, and Elsevier occasionally has a service that can help with where the science is great and the methodology is fine, but you need to edit the article for an English speaking audience.
Sure. Now, are there any features that open access will allow you to do that may be constrained by print formats, such as use of all color figures or differences in word count or things I can't even think of right now? So, anything else that you can kind of play with because of the format you're going to use?
Well, I don't envision the word count being much different, and the reason for that is that there's still the reviewers have to read all those words.
Hmm.
So we may not be slavish to the word count if there's a need for further explanation, but I'm not going to deviate too much from that. As we get our voice, as we get more experience, I'm anticipating that there may be that there may be some flexibility with color figures, etc. I will point out that both in practice and JACI, you know, I mean, your articles, when you get accepted, do get posted online pretty quickly, even
Hmm.
before the print articles come out. So there may not be a ton of difference there. The big difference, though, is that it will be open access, which means that once it's on our Elsevier's website, once it's been accepted, it is fine and it has a DOI. It is findable by anyone with internet access, and I think that and that and I little be anyone, so it can be doesn't have to subscribe to the journal, etc. And so that will help authors that have a requirement to be in gold. There's more in Europe and overseas than it is in the U.S. just yet. But for those authors that need gold open access now, JACI will adhere to that, or JACI Global will adhere to that standard, and can also be a place for them.
Mm. I think that's an important point for authors to consider. But what are some other, talking points or reasons why authors should choose Jackie Global as their first destination as opposed to other allergy journals?
Well, to be frank, I think that the Jackie family of journals and the Academy is a, the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, and I have a robust bias, having served on the board of directors and having had the privilege of having a year as president. We are the top, or certainly one of the top. We feel we're the largest prestigious both clinical and translational allergy immunology organization, in the world. And the board of directors would not have commissioned a third journal
Mm.
without the expectation that it's going to be a quality journal. Being more open does not mean it has no, it won't be discerning. You just simply don't have to be immediately impactful. And I do think that, to be frank, I think the key brand has meaning. When we discussed the nomenclature of this, we mimicked what JAMA has done, and we mimicked what Lancet has done, and those two journals did that for a reason. The brand name of JAMA and the brand name of Lancet have powerful meaning, and
Mhm.
frankly, uh, uh, Zuhair and Michael and Zuhair's predecessor Donald Young, they worked really hard to make that brand name worthwhile. So our job as a journal is to live up to those standards, but still be open enough so that earlier work can find its way into print,
Mhm.
digital
Are
print.
you
I should.
Sure, sure. Are you already accepting submissions? I think you mentioned, was it
Yes.
September 1st?
Yes, we have. We have gotten submissions in a couple of ways. One is by if a article does not fit best with Jackie, but Zuhair or the editors think that it's a good article, it's just not quite for them. We've gotten some referred over from them,
Mm,
and likewise in practice has the same thing, and we are beginning to get de novo submissions now. So we are getting both direct from authors and transfers from one journal to the next. Uh, so when a transfer occurs, what happens is that basically, it comes into our system. I take a look at it. If I think it's within our wheelhouse and we should consider it, then what happens is that then the authors are there's communication with the authors, and they're given the option of, yes, we would like global to review it, or they can say thanks but no, we're going to submit to wherever we're going to submit to. So
mm,
it's not automatic. At some juncture there may be an automatic checkbox that say, if we don't accept it, you wanted to go to another quad AI journal. uh, but at the moment we look at it. That can happen pre-review, which that means is that Zuhair looks at it or Michael looks at it and says, it's a this is okay stuff, or this is good stuff, but it's not quite for us. Let's see if it's appropriate for global, because they have a broader scope, a broader mechanism scope, not basic science, case report, etc. They can also come post review, where there's been a review by JACI or by In Practice, and a lot of salient points have been come up, have been identified, and so things are not quite what they so it's not as it's just not as good a fit as one would think, as the authors would hope. But they will also get that. Now, if the article has been already reviewed, uh, what I will do is, I will, if the authors say yes, we would like global to review it. In part, this is the beauty of using the same reviewer pool. We will say, rather than start all over again,
mm,
I will ask the authors to respond to the previous reviews, and then the previous reviewers may or may not be in a position to do the second review. We hope that they will be, but otherwise, any subsequent reviews will occur with in the context of they've already responded to reviews, not starting all
mhm.
over.
Yeah, that's a very interesting aspect of it, and one that you can take advantage of given the overlap there. It's really interesting. Well, where can authors go to find more information about submitting their manuscripts to Jackie Global?
Well, we have it'll be linked through the Academy website.
Mhm.
To be quite honest, when I'm getting to any of our journals, I usually looking for articles. As a reader, I go to the Jackie website first, and then I follow that lead. Now, for submissions, it's an editorial manager, and the backslash is Jackie G for
Mm,
Jackie Global, and hopefully you'll be able to provide those links
mhm,
in the materials that go with the podcast. And there will be, technically, our first edition, or our first issue, will come out coincident with the national meeting, which, knock on wood, pray that it's we're able to do this in person, and not that Zoom isn't wonderful, but you know it's not the same as in person. Hopefully, we're able to do that.
absolutely. And I anticipate that at the annual meeting, whether it's virtual or in person or hybrid, that we're going to see a lot more information about Jackie Global.
Yes, we will do that. The other thing about Jackie Global being all digital, this is because of my research interest. It's a green journal.
Mm,
In other words, no trees have died unless they were cut down to fuel the power plants. But no trees, no trees were used in printing the articles until you print them out of your printer. But if you're reading it, if you're just reading, if you got a PDF and you're looking at it on your smartphone or computer, my eyesight requires a computer. Uh, 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 that makes it one more, it makes its uptake more widespread, but it also we will not have we will not have the physical imprint journal, and frankly, that element has made the entire open access community more feasible
Mhm.
because they're virtual publications.
Sure. Do you have any advice for authors prior to submission? Do you see just common mistakes that people make that lead to either more extensive reviewer comments or the need for, immediate changes from the editorial staff?
Well, so first of all, I think to be honest, knowing what your result is and knowing what your storyline is and why this result would be is meaningful in the context of either building basic science that would be relevant to an allergy immunology disease. Uh, that's an important first step. I do think that many basic science biology papers uh, that if you're printing in a journal that is dedicated to specific diseases, you would like to outline, why is this signaling pathway in epithelial cells germane to, or why is it potentially germane to people that study asthma, allergy,
Mm.
skin disease, etc. So that would be one thing. The other thing, frankly, is to, as much as possible, is to make it clear to the reader, you know, if the article is hard to read, people, if they have limited bandwidth, they're going to give up reading the article. So your abstract has to be informative. Uh, what drives me nuts is when an abstract is fairly vague and you're really looking for the punchy take-home point. And uh, the other thing is where a lot of reviews get tripped up is with their over extending their results. So in other words, they've made a
Mm.
finding. It might be statistically significant. How biologically relevant is it? People sometimes oversell that. I think putting your result into perspective, and also leading where this article will go next. I think those things. If you're going to give a lecture based on, I would say pretend you're giving a talk.
Mm.
You know, you're giving a talk and you're describing. Okay, and you're giving your talk because you're interviewing for a job at another place. So you want your audience engaged. You do not want them, you might bedazzle them with how complicated your methods are, but you will also befuddle them as to why they should hire you. And and I would say pretend you're giving a talk based on your article. What's the take home point you would want your talk to have? Keep that in mind because your readers want to know that take home point as well. And if you can, put that in the abstract or put it in the title so people know what it is that what you did and why you're doing it.
Yeah, oh, I like that. So if I may summarize, what I'm hearing from you is a couple of key points. One, know your audience. Two, don't bury the lead.
Yeah,
And three, forget the smoke and mirrors. It is what it is. Just stick with the main take home points and go from there.
absolutely. I think those are, you said it better than I would.
I'm just feeding back all the great information you gave us. Well, I'd like to ask, how many manuscripts do you think that you personally read each day?
Well, to be honest, right now it's not as many. I'm preparing for the waterfall to come
Mm.
to come at me. I'm getting a handful now. The We we have already named. So I'm looking to develop an editorial board, and I've been communicating with people, recruiting associate editors on board. Uh, I'm really pleased to say that Mimi Tang from Australia has agreed to, and again, the part of our international scope, has agreed to be an associate editor for us. There's one other well-known person that has not officially been approved yet because for all the journals, all editorial board appointments are submitted to the board of directors for approval. That hasn't happened yet, so
Mhm,
I'm not going
mhm.
to say who that is, but it will stun nobody when they see this person's name on the masthead. But I'm also reaching out to a variety of other people. I'm hoping to have a person whose primary goal in life is to conduct basic science experiments. So that interest is reflected in on the in the editors. I'm also I'm finding that this will stun nobody, that everybody is
Mhm,
super,
mhm.
super busy. And so for those people that aren't quite ready to commit to an associate editor I mean, I've been approved for a given number, and so I'm certainly not going to exceed that. But for folks that I would love to have on the board and can't quite do that as editors, I would ask to be on the editorial board. And for those, I would view those folks as either ad hoc editors for specific issues, to either help handle a couple of manuscript submissions. So what an editor does, whether so the editor in chief sees the submissions and either and assigns them to associate editors, or keeps them for them, or acts as an associate editor themselves, and then they invite reviewers for that article, and then the article goes out for review. And to find, you try to get 3 reviewers, and sometimes you have to come up with 20 names to find the people who
Mm.
aren't too busy to do it, aren't already committed to other papers, etc. And then you get the reviews back, and then that associate editor has to make a decision about, is the paper ready to accept? Is it ready to accept but with some typos? That's a provisional accept.
Mm.
Uh, there is a minor revision, which is a little bit more than just a couple typos, but really not that big a deal. Probably doesn't require new data or new experiments. Major revision is that, and then there's a flat out decline or reject, which we wish you the best, but not it's just not quite for us. And so some of the where for an associate editor the hard job is when you have one review that says this is the best thing ever published in any language, and another reviewer says this thing should not be published in any language. And so you've got to so then you've got to view the pros and cons of each approach, and then and then you make a decision about how relevant the art. It's not a judgment of how good the article is, although good articles it's how how useful the article will be, and what part of the needle will be moved if that gets published and people begin to cite it.
Mm.
And I think that's so that's maybe the more philosophical view, but we really do, as I said, we invite basic science papers, with the caveats that they have to be allergy immunology relevant. So you know the basic science of turtles is a zoology, unless you're dealing with turtle allergy, is a zoology paper. But the basic science of airway mechanics, or mast cell physiology in the context of food allergy, or a new potential molecule that seems to interfere with lymphocyte function that could be used. Those those kinds of basic science papers that are the building blocks of ultimate translational research. We're happy to get those.
Hmm. And what if somebody found the cure for hives in turtles?
Uh, I, I I would refer them to a veterinary allergy journal.
I could see.
But how does a turtle scratch anyway?
Well, that's why they suffer, and that's why it's so important. Oh boy, we all right. As we as we wind down here,
You
I can
can't
see.
edit this.
No, yeah, I can hear you. I could hear you filtering all of your comments as you chose your very politically correct and kind reply to that. Um, well, being mindful of your time, I'd like to ask you, how do you plan on finding time to serve as editor in chief of JACI Global while also continuing your own research and serving in all of your other leadership roles? I mean, do you ever sleep?
Uh, yes, I do sleep. I've been asked that at home more than once. But to be honest, I'm you know, I was division chief for 18 years, and I've stepped away from that. I was center
Mm.
director. I remain medical director of our research center, but I've stepped away. I'm very busy with research administration, but this is to I made space in my effort allocation for something like this. Right now, I'm very busy, but I anticipate that over the next year or so, as JACI Global becomes more established, and the research endeavors that I'm continuing to oversee, get defined for the next few years, then that will happen this year. That's how I'll do this, because I applied for Jackie Global specifically because I wanted this as part of my, as one of the major things that I do.
Mm.
This is to me, this was a, I have a 5-year term, and my view of this is that my job is to get the journal established, get some submissions in. We'll go through growing pains and iterations, and what we're accepting a year from now may be a little bit different than what we're accepting now. That's an experiential thing. That's just the reality of it. But my goal is that within a year and a half, JACI Global is seeing that we do all the things that we need to do to be indexed, and that takes some time to get done. But once we're indexed, and once we figure out workshops or advice or ways that authors might use JACI Global as a way, what maneuvers they can use to make sure that their articles are cited, and therefore their own personal H factor is good. In Europe, the H factor for promotion is a big deal, and increasingly
Mm.
so in the United States. So it's kind of your personal impact factor. Uh, you know, because of the research I do, I do controlled exposure experiments to air pollutants, and our work has been used by the EPA to define some of the, as part of a larger, much bigger group of data to help define the clean air standards. But some of those papers are very niche and very specialized, and are published in some much more modest, publications. I mean, they weren't in JACI, but because of because of that use, they actually are amongst some of our higher cited
Mm.
papers. And so I think it's that's one reason why I think that there are some papers that don't get the bandwidth that they might deserve because of the way they're titled or the way the abstract reads or something. And understanding how the search engines find those articles so that people say, "Oh, that's an interesting idea," or "That's an interesting result," or "I could cite this in planning my own experiment." Uh, you know, that's how people can. The other thing too is a well written review article gets cited very well because a review article
Mm.
oftentimes provides multiple bits of information. If you're writing a grant, do you want to oftentimes the one review article helps you as you get scatter in some of the original papers as well.
Well, that's great. Well, Dr. Peden, we really can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today. And I'm excited to see JACI Global launch and see where it goes. And if you're willing, we'd love to have you back maybe in a year or two, and you can kind of offer some reflections on how things are going and next directions you're going in. Before we depart, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just we're enthusiastic about global. I hope the allergy community is enthusiastic about it. I really appreciate you taking the time and inviting me to speak to introduce JACI Global to the Academy in yet another forum. But this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate all your effort in giving me a chance to chat about the journal.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you again.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode. Please visit www.AAAAI.org for show notes and any pertinent links from today's conversation. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify so you can receive new episodes in the future. Thank you again for listening.